All right. So we're going to be talking about QAnon conspiracy theory and if it is to be considered or becoming a new religious movement. So I'm going to jump right into the very basic element on what is QAnon. And fundamentally, QAnon is what would be called a super conspiracy, which is basically a conspiracy theory that has multiple layers. So there's a central belief that a deep state cabal of satanic pedophile global elites are responsible for all the evil in the world. And whoops. Oh, crap. How did I move this? Crap. 1 second. It's in portrait mode. Sorry, because I have my screen rotated for coding, so I had to undo the portrait mode. There we go. You're going to see all of this. Take two. There we go. Okay. What are you seeing now, Amar? Because I can't see anything on my screen anymore.
We see some planet.
Jupiter? Okay. Now do you see the slides?
Yep.
All right, there we go. Jeez. Okay. So, yeah, it's basically a super conspiracy that posits that there's a deep state cabal of satanic pedophile global elites that are responsible for all the evil in the world. And they also believe that these elites were seeking / now have successfully brought down President Trump, who they perceive to be the world's only hope in defeating the deep state. So to this end, QAnon adherents believe that Q is a military intelligence operation. And basically, the QAnon movement has brought together a multitude of conspiracy theory beliefs. So under the main narrative of this deep state cabal satanic pedophiles, you'll have stuff about the Illuminati, the New World Order, 9/11 truthers, birthers, secret societies like Skull and Bones, Bilderberger's Trilateral Commission, Jewish bloodletting, which is where the adrenochrome conspiracy comes from, stuff about the Jewish question, ancient symbolism, UFOs, Bavarian bloodlines, reptilians, hollow earthers, and honestly, the only really thing they don't believe in is flat Earth. And even QAnon thinks flat earthers are ridiculous. So at least there's one common thread there. Basically, across all these other conspiracy beliefs is the common thread that there's an evil deep state cabal of satanic pedophiles that are, responsible for all the bad in the world. And that's the one thing that you could identify. It doesn't really matter what else QAnoners believe in. It's really that central line that flows from one part of the ideology to the next. QAnon started in 2017 on the 20th of October. It really was just a single post on 4chan's politically incorrect board. It was called The Calm Before the Storm. And they were actually discussing the Mueller investigation, and some anonymous user basically posted that Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested Monday, October 30th. And obviously that never happened, but that anonymous user kept posting, and over a period of time, it basically gained popularity. Now, the anonymous poster that claims to have access to secret military information or government information is not unique. It's actually a genre on image boards like 4chan. And a lot of individuals have claimed to have top secret information. And at the time Q was posting in 2017, but a little bit before in 2016, there was other individuals who were doing the same, such as FBI Anon, High Level Access Anon, CIA Anon, White House Insider Anon. All these individuals were going to 4chan and posting information they claimed to have secret knowledge about. The difference between QAnon and these others is how QAnon has mainstreamed over 3 years. However, those who were familiar with the environment of the boards are familiar with this Anon genre, and a lot of them didn't take them seriously. It's really in 2018 when Tracy Diaz basically brought QAnon content onto her basically stream to 150,000 followers that it got into the mainstream from 4chan onto platforms like Reddit. One thing that's important to remember is that QAnon does find its origins in the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. If you're not familiar with Pizzagate, it basically emerged in the volatile socio-political environment of the 2016 U.S. election. So there was anger. There was another, civil rights protest at the time following the murder of an African-American individual by police. There was hysteria that was unleashed during the electoral campaign between Trump and Hillary Clinton, on top of, Russian interference, on top of the frenzy that was reinforced by the growth and impact of disinformation and conspiracy theory sites such as Zero Hedge and InfoWars. And what happened is that during that volatile environment, it really compelled many individuals to embrace outrageous and unsubstantiated claims and conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton. And at the height of that, it's basically the conspiracy about Pizzagate, which alleged that coded words and satanic symbolism in the hacked emails from John Podesta that were part of the WikiLeaks uh, pile of information that was released was that the fact that the Hillary Clinton campaign ordered so much pizza from a specific pizza shop, it was linked to FBI documents that are also in the leaks that said that that was a code word for child trafficking, and that the Democrats in the Hillary campaign were actually, ordering children to consume. And it was from that conspiracy that basically the Comet Ping Pong, which was a popular DC pizzeria, led one individual to investigate Comet Ping Pong with an AR-15 to find if there was children in the basement. There's no basement in Comet Ping Pong, therefore there was no children. But basically, out of the remnants of Pizzagate, it's where QAnon found a pool of individuals that were willing to believe in the evil associated to the Democrats and Hillary Clinton. Now, prior to 2020, QAnon was fringe. I don't think it's something that we might have been talking about right now in the same way we are if it wasn't for the pandemic. By looking at the growth of QAnon on social media, what you're seeing right now is some of the numbers I had pulled from Facebook from 2017 up until I think it's from August 2020. And what you could see is that around the month of March, when the US went in lockdown and Canada, there was really just a huge spike in QAnon membership and content that was being shared. And basically what has happened is there was a 5,300% increase in QAnon membership on social media. It went from 200,000 members to the height before all Facebook takedowns to 3.94 million. This is an aggregate number, so it doesn't mean that there was 4 million QAnon followers on Facebook, because you could obviously be in multiple groups like I was at the time. So what happens, though, is that there is a fair amount of growth, and it's not only growth in membership, but it's growth in content that was being shared. And in the same period where you could see, especially in the red and blue line, which are groups, pages are usually controlled by one person, so their activity is quite lower. But what you're seeing in groups is you're seeing content that was shared about maybe 200 to 300 posts a week skyrocketed to 3,000 posts per week. And the majority of the content in QAnon communities were shared in 2020. And it really aligns with that. And if you're looking at the line in blue, which is the international QAnon communities, that growth in May happened mainly after the long-term lockdowns in Spain and Italy, and the impact that had economically and politically on those nations. So the environment of the pandemic, the harm that it caused economically, politically, socially, that crisis fed into the fear and the disinformation around the world, and QAnon kind of acted as a way to promote a lot of medical disinformation and gain credibility in that way. Now, this is where QAnon has really evolved from a conspiracy theory to what I've been calling a hyperreal religion. Now, this is a concept that was developed by an academic in Australia who's an anthropologist called Adam Possamai. And though QAnon really stated as a series of conspiracy theories, like I was saying, it really has evolved into this religio-political ideology. And basically, a hyperreal religion is based on the premise that pop culture shapes and creates our actual reality. An example that some might have heard about before is the Heaven's Gate movement. So in 1997, this was a church that committed mass suicide, but their belief basically blended science fiction belief in extraterrestrials, the Book of Revelations, and predictions from Nostradamus. Now, similar to these individuals, QAnon does take popular culture artifacts and integrate them into a spiritual framework. So QAnon openly uses the work of popular culture from entertainment, American evangelicalism, and these conspiracy theories, which are an American cultural element, as a basis for its movement. So an example what we have here is one of the big influencers, Joe M, was sharing a series of QAnon drops, or Q drops, that were referencing movies in the movement. And this is how they find meaning. Everything is a reflection of the reality to them. So though it's fundamentally secular, QAnon filters its understanding of, let's say, ultimate concern through popular culture and American evangelicalism. Their cosmology, so how the world and the universe appears, what it looks like, its characteristics, the type of creatures that populate it, and the QAnon anthropology, the idea about human beings and our origins, are rooted in conspiracy theory, alternative historical facts, mythical history, and film. An example is Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, quite popular in the QAnon community, and QAnon followers recommend it as evidence to the effect of adrenochrome. The Matrix scene for blue pill, red pill, not only popular for QAnon, but also in other communities on the far right, is a way of referencing the Great Awakening and coming to the realization that the reality that you have grown in is actually that of perception, and you need to wake up to be able to see the world as it really is. The slogan that QAnon uses all the time, where we go one, we go all, is from the film White Squall. And the official YouTube trailer for that film has gained millions and millions of views over the past year. And you're seeing top-rated comments with over 5,000 upvotes, and it basically reads as a thumb up if Q sent you here. The prophetic figure of the movement, known as Q, regularly references movies in their Q drops, and this plays a central role in meaning making for the movement. And this is kind of what I've tried to demonstrate just in this screen cap. And basically, since 2017, this is how QAnon has become mainstreamed into popular culture and onto the political scene. So the concept of hyperreality does come from Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation. And Baudrillard was positing that Western culture appears to be dominated by simulations. So the distinction between object representation, a thing, and ideas are not binding. So what Baudrillard was describing in the 80s, we could see today as the fusing of social media, which generates a world of simulations. And this kind of has an impact on our capacity to rationalize and to critique. So it's from this theory of hyperreality that Adam Posmai posited the idea of hyperreal religion. And he defines this as a simulacrum of a religion created out of or in symbiosis with commodified popular culture, which provides inspiration as a metaphorical level or as a source of belief for everyday life. I realized I should have put that on the slide and I didn't, so I apologize. Basically, his definition describes a realm of interactions of hyperreal religions. Basically, they're spiritualities with significant popular culture content. And basically what this is, another example would be Jediism. And this started as an internet joke during the census in the UK, where people were egging each other on to put on as their religion Jediism as a way to have the UK officially recognize that as a religion. Though it started as a joke online, what has happened now is there is a community of individuals who practice the Jediism as a religion, and they use the content from the Star Wars film as a way of guiding the ethical framework for their life. They obtain their sentiment of ultimate concern and meaning through the perception of popular culture elements. So this is not something that is unique to QAnon, but it's a way to frame it and understand how QAnon has evolved from a conspiracy theory to something more. And what's important is that QAnon believers construct and make their meaning by redefining their place in society in a secularized parallel to religious tradition. So basically, QAnon adherents consume Q drops. They construct and make their meaning from this. They take the Q drops and they create memes. They create films. They create communities. They create protests. They mobilize offline. They pick up weapons and attack pizza shops, or go down in an armored vehicle and hold a bridge. Now, this is when you're looking at something like QAnon, you have to understand that this discourse of religion and conspiracy theories are linked by this common function. Both permit the development of symbolic resources that enable humans to define and address the problem of evil. At its heart, people who believe in QAnon are trying to find very complex answers, and QAnon kind of acts as its master narrative to simply explain difficult things such as a pandemic, economic strife, war, child trafficking, child abuse. And the sharp distinction that is created out of this is black and white. It's good versus evil. It removes the gray area. And what happens is basically for QAnon believers, it's not about secular evidence. It comes to be a matter of faith, because QAnon at its heart is non-falsifiable. It doesn't matter how much evidence a journalist or an academic or civil society will throw at a believer to counter the claim. So when you're looking at QAnon, it's easy to sit there as an outsider and go, why can so many people believe that in something that flies in the face of facts? Why they're crazy? Why do they believe in this? It makes no sense to me. But rather than trying to believe what is not believe why someone would believe in this, it's more important to ask the question, what are QAnon believers doing with their belief system? It's the same thing when you study religion. It may be weird for some people as to why people believe in Christianity. It could be weird why people believe in elements of Hinduism or Buddhism. But we don't necessarily mock them for the beliefs, but we, as scholars of religion, we try to understand what are these believers doing with their beliefs. And it's the same thing with QAnon believers. Now, one of the groups in QAnon that I like to study are called Qevangelicals. Obviously, this is an American-centric conspiracy when it started, and it is deeply rooted in evangelicalism and the Christian right in the United States. Now, QAnon has adopted and integrated Christian elements into forming its unique worldview. So theologically, it's rooted in evangelicalism, the religious right, neo-charismatic movements, specifically these movements that have brought in a political impact from the 1970s and the 1980s. Their theology involves a worldview that, a cabal that controlled the government and aims to control the freedom of the people through technology, medicine, liberalism. And basically, they've also integrated elements of satanic ritual abuse, which was a very popular movement in the 70s and 80s, which was also known as the Satanic Panics. And this originated in a period where Christians in the US were believing that there was a global network of individuals that were kidnapping children for the purpose of pornography, sex trafficking, and satanic ritual. The Satanic Panics and the central narrative of QAnon are very parallel. And prior to 2020, it's probably why QAnon actually found resonance within a boomer population versus the younger population we see now, following QAnon integrating into places like Instagram and TikTok and other social media platforms. So basically, the secular conspiracy narrative of QAnon meshes well with the more evangelical elements, which already resonated strongly within the socio-political environment of the United States. Philip Gonzalez, who's a Swiss researcher, in his book Que ton règne vienne, basically examined how fundamentalists and neo-charismatics in the United States are seeking to replace democratic pluralism with a theocracy. On the flip side of the coin, Anna Merlin, in her book Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theories and Their Surprise Arrest to Power, examines how conspiracy theories find resonance with the American population for the same reason, to replace democratic pluralism with a new government or democratic movement. The idiosyncrasies combining religion and politics, American apocalypticism, are what highlights the bricolage of conspiracy theories that have been described by Michael Barkun. The desire of a segment of the United States population finds resonance with QAnons are seeking to replace the deep state. They're seeking to replace their current government with a new golden age. But it now goes beyond the United States. QAnon adherents see a world that is at war with an invisible enemy, not just a country. The apocalyptic battle is between forces of good and evil. It's between God and the devil, which can mean, it could refer simultaneously politically to an invisible deep state, or it could also refer to a larger spiritual battle between good and evil. And this fits with the prophetic narrative that QAnon adherents have been driving since 2017. Just to give a little bit of numbers in here, based on some Twitter analysis I was doing, Ephesians 6:10-18 is the most shared verse among QAnon believers. This is the verse about putting on the armor of God. And that has taken a whole new meaning, during the 2020 pandemic for QAnon and other evangelical communities that are not QAnon believers. Ephesians 6 is basically a condemnation of governments and the impact that it has on an individual's freedom. But it's not only that, it is a key passage when it comes to talking about spiritual warfare and clothing yourself in the armor of God. Well, QAnon's reaction to the pandemic for a good population of that community has been leveraging the language of spiritual warfare, especially since Q in 2018 took a more religious turn in his Q drops. So when you're looking at conspiracy theories from QAnon around 5G, ID 2020, which was the government meeting between powerful people to determine, I forgot what ID 2020 was. Event 201 was the one to do the trial of a pandemic and how you would react to it, which, you know, means rich people were trying to destroy the world and do population control. But basically what you're seeing is spiritual warfare is used as a way of explaining some of these individuals for at least the evangelical segment of QAnon. Also, Q regularly uses the Bible as a hermeneutical lens to explore and explain, the malign forces in the conspiracies that he has. So basically, for evangelicals in the U.S. with a special interest in one or more of these form of expressions, QAnon is an interesting avenue where you could combine your spiritual beliefs with your political ones, which is something that's already common in the United States. And it's also important to note that QAnon does find strong resonance within the neo-charismatic movements, where you've seen pastors leverage QAnon conspiracy theories without necessarily being a member of the QAnon community, just because it finds resonance within their own movements as well. Now, this language of spiritual warfare has found resonance not only in the US, but in Canada, some parts of Europe, and Australia. Now, one of the interesting facts about the QAnon movement was that earlier this year I found a QAnon church, which for the since February, past 9 months, I've been attending their Sunday services, which are 2 hour long and not the greatest to go to, but it's quite interesting as a religious scholar to see how QAnon has become, for this community, a formalized religion. And for the Omega Kingdom ministries, you see that the Bible is used as a hermeneutical lens to explain QAnon, but QAnon in turn is used as a hermeneutical lens to interpret the Bible. The Omega Kingdom Ministry is part of a network of independent congregations, which are called ecclesias, which are basically home congregations trying to reproduce the original experience of the apostles and Jesus. So you're trying to keep your community at 12 to 13 members. Their spiritual advisor is a man called Mark Taylor, who is one of the top QAnon influencers. And basically, they were around prior to QAnon. OKM was rooted in a prepper community. They've been around for a while. QAnon is kind of how they found their own place. And what they have is something they've gone online during the pandemic, and it's called Equipping the Ecclesia. So they live stream and they explain that this is not, an official ecclesia. It's not an official quote unquote mass, even though they could bless the grape juice and the bread on the video. But what it means is for them is they take Acts 20:20, where Paul met with the elders of the ecclesia, and basically he quotes that, how I have taught you in public meetings and in your homes, and I have not held anything back to help you grow. So from their perspective, the Equipping the Ecclesia is emulating the public meetings that Paul was doing to awaken more people to the message of Christ. However, they're doing these public meetings to awaken people to QAnon. Now, if you were going to visit the Home Congregation Worldwide's website, if you're familiar with neo-charismatic movements in the U.S. and home congregations, it's not very different at first glance. You can see that they're theologically rooted in dominionism. However, if you're looking at the tabs on the side, you see a lot of material referencing QAnon, the deep state, and it's doesn't take too long to get down the rabbit hole into QAnon conspiracy theories on their website. Now, basically, how these services function is you are going to start watching videos with them. So basically, you're the initial meeting, like their first one, they talked about the 7 mountains of societal influence. The 7 mountains basically use the language of dominionism, which is a theology that believes countries, including the U.S., should be governed by Christian biblical law. And the goal is to attain a socio-political and economic transformation through the gospel and Jesus. And this is what through the 7 mountains of influence, which is religion, family, education, government, media, entertainment, and business. And basically what dominionism does, it blends the apocalyptic worldview they have with QAnon, and basically dominionists or QAnon believers want to basically destroy the deep state that is controlling them. In Omega Kingdom Ministry, you'll hear them reference regular in their service the deep state church. And how it happens is basically if you're going to attend a service, which you might want to, but don't. The first hour is dedicated to a 1 hour Bible study by Russ Wagner, who's been a pastor in the neo-charismatic movement for about 30 years. And then the second half is hosted by Kevin Bushy, who's a retired Navy colonel. He used to work at the Pentagon, and he's basically converted to QAnon, and he spends 60 minutes where they do a Q military intelligence update. And basically Bushy presents the congregants with the most recent news from QAnons, the drops from the week, what influencers in the community are doing, and they use the Bible to explain, what happened in the Q community to justify that this is part of God's mandate on earth. So basically, the objective for equipping the ecclesia, in the words of Russ Wagner, is to open people's eyes and help them wake up. They're basically red-pilling people into QAnon using the Bible. Bushy and Wagner, their aim is to train congregants to form their own home congregation in the future. That's the point of equipping the ecclesia, or even the offline courses they offer. So they claim that they have about 40 coaches that have ecclesias of their own around the world. And they have headquarters in Australia, Cambodia, Canada, the UK, Germany, and Japan. And basically, when you're taking these courses from week 1 and on, they're instructing you, stop listening to any mainstream media, even Fox News, because they're all Luciferian. They're all part of the cabal. What Omega Kingdom Ministry provides is a roadmap to QAnon radicalization. They provide QAnon YouTube channels, which now are mostly gone. So they're providing them to places like BitChute or Odyssey. They provide a media diet of QAnon influencers and saying, these are the journalists you need to trust. They're independent individual journalists. Don't trust the mainstream. So not only are they indoctrinating into dominionism, but they're also indoctrinating them in QAnon. And, a lot of these congregants are not going to be unfamiliar with dominionism or evangelicalism, but they are new to QAnon. And what they've done to introduce them is they've used a series called Fall Cabal, which is a Dutch QAnon documentary. And it's one of the documentaries that usually people who have radicalized to violence in QAnon are usually have consumed this specific type, these videos. And what they're doing is week by week, it's a 3-hour video broken into 10 segments. So they've basically done a segment per week, and they give an opportunity for the congregants to ask questions, and then they explain what's happening. So in an example, during Easter, Omega Kingdom Ministry was, talking about the overlap between the initial Passover in the Bible and the pandemic as being the second Passover that is happening right now on Earth. The pandemic is, a way to punish the world, and as a way that, they initially thought that it was a Chinese virus, and now, Donald Trump and Q team had control of the virus, and they're going to use it as a way of defeating the deep state. So what they're doing is that during the lessons that they're interpreting biblical concepts of Passover, but then they're looking at this through the lens of Q. And they're doing a correlation between what happened in the Bible and what's happening right now as a way of justifying the evil in the world by saying that this is part of the way that we're going to have our apocalyptic realization. And as you go through the biblical study process within the first hour of, let's say, that Passover week, you do start with biblical concepts. But as you go further and further, it is just more QAnon conspiracy theories, and they're just directly quoting Q drops. Now, basically, after you've had your first hour of biblical studies, you have your QAnon military intelligence update. So, and at times QAnon conspiracies are what drive the Sunday service. An example is the service from April 26. It was inspired by adherents who had been asking about the biblical validity of Project Looking Glass, which is a conspiracy theory about time travel. And they were concerned about, what the Bible says about time travel, because if it's not biblically true, then Q cannot be true. So Wagner, in his Bible study section, claimed that there is a biblical foundation for time travel, and he was citing various biblical passages such as 1 King 18, Ezekiel 40, Acts 8, and Revelations 4. There's a mixed interpretation for that. There's some evangelicals that have gone down that path, but it's not necessarily common within evangelical communities outside of neo-charismatic circles that you'd have an understanding of time travel. But they seem to find a justification to say, how would, let's say, in Revelations, John understand what is happening if he wouldn't have gone to the future? And for them, what's happening in the book of Revelation is John traveled to the future and he was seeing what was happening in 2020. And they were equating it to right now. And what's happening is when you get to the QAnon military intelligence update, when you get to this section that really talks about the Q drops, which you're not being spoon fed, that picture you're seeing is literally what you're going to find on 8 QAnon groups. It's basically how they say, well, there's a biblical foundation for this, thanks to Russ Wagner. Now let's get into the conspiracy theory, and they really drive it down. So basically, adherents are plunged head down the rabbit hole, and they're hit full into their face with QAnon propaganda. And what's happening is at this point is, if you're going to accept the biblical conclusions, if your faith leads you down that path, it makes it a lot easier for you to accept what is happening in the QAnon community. And this is how they're really pushing individuals further down the path. And it's not only within OKM, you're going to see this with a lot of other individuals, is that if you start getting the trust from a QAnon influencer, your belief in them is what is going to push you down the path to further accept belief in QAnon. So we could have some time to answer questions and push a conversation. Very quickly, if QAnon is not already a new religious movement, it's really on its way to come, not only within Omega Kingdom Ministries, which is one example of this, but within a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing post-election results. It's going to be a way where QAnon believers are really basing their adherence to the movement on faith. And it's about what are they doing with their belief. It's not about the absurdity of their beliefs. It's about what they're doing with their belief. That's significant in this discussion. And considering how QAnon can be religious or is similar to a religion, can be a way to better understand the impact that QAnon will have when it comes to a public health threat. We have an idea of how religions reacts to things like vaccines and abortions and other topics. When a vaccine is developed, we're going to have to promote this to a large segment of the population if we want herd immunity. So approaching QAnon believers as simple conspiracy theorists might not be the best way, but understanding them as a religion, there are frameworks and tools to get an idea of how people behave in these scenarios. It's the same thing when we're talking about national security. Amar and I have written a few pieces now about QAnon as a national security public safety threat. Well, considering the human behaviors within this environment from a religious perspective provides a framework by which we could analyze these people. There's never been an instance of conspiracy theories leading to violence. It's maybe the Hanau Shushio bar shooting might have been the first one. But it's really more about, no one's gone to shoot people up because they believe that the moon landing was faked. However, framing how QAnon is an apocalyptic movement provides a way to understand the threat they pose. It's the same thing to democratic institutions. We have QAnon believers who have been elected to Congress and to state legislators. We had an election in the US where people were running on QAnon platforms. This is not only going to happen in the US, there's QAnon believers in Canada, there's in France, in the UK, in Australia, in Germany. We've seen QAnon linked to the AFD in Germany. They're linked to the Orange Vests movement in Italy. They were linked to the Parti of Marine Le Pen in France. They were part of the Brexit movement in the UK. These believers are having an impact on democratic votes and democratic institutions. And understanding them from the perspective of a new religious movement provides a better way to understand the impact that they'll have on our societies. So that is it for my presentation spiel.